thanks everyone for coming along today. This is the first of a new initiative that we've kicked off as part of the SSA mentoring programme. But we opened it up to not just the mentors and mentees that are participating, but to others that might be interested. So we thought this year, as part of CPD, we would create some sort of professional skills for statisticians series. So these are just a set of 3 lunchtime talks that we're going to be delivering to try and help with just some of what are often deemed as softer skills that people need as part of our job. Now, hang on a wee second. I've just realised I've lost. Can you all still see me? Okay, I just realised I've lost my camera, but that's all good. Anyway, so on behalf of the mentoring committee, Lizzie and Nicole, who are the co-chairs, and myself, Andrea Peng, and Julie Simpson, and I should have also acknowledged there Katrina Skura, who has recently joined. We, as I say, are making some changes and trying to do a few more things to complement the paired programme. So the webinar we're going to go through today, I'm going to deliver a presentation about developing essential communication skills. Ultimately, I could probably talk for about a week on some of these things that I'm going to try and cover in an hour, but hopefully this will give you a taste of some of the things that I think about when I'm approaching communication. There are 2 more webinars as part of this series that are going to be held in June. One on project management that Emily Karahalios is going to deliver for us, and another one that Julie and Katrina will be delivering on tips for interview success. So there's still time to register for those if people haven't had a chance to yet. Okay, so I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that I'm speaking to you from today. So for me, that's the Wurundjeri people from the Kulin Nation. I'm based in Melbourne. Now, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Karen Lamb. I am very passionate about mentoring and created the SSA mentoring programme. I'm also very enthusiastic about trying to help people develop their communication skills, and that's what I'm going to talk to you all about today. So personally, I co-head the Methods and Implementation Support for Clinical and Health Research Hub. That's a bit of a mouthful. So MISH, Biostatistics and Clinical Epidemiology Node. So we provide biostatistical support to health researchers and clinicians across the University of Melbourne and collaborating hospital partners. So talking to people is really at the heart of my job. So as I mentioned, there's a lot I could talk about today. There's a lot of things I'm going to try and cover in brief, but really I think some of these things some data elements could be a whole course in their own right. But just to begin, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about me and why I feel the need to talk about communication. So as I mentioned, I work collaborating or consulting with a lot of health researchers across the university. I have worked as a statistician for over 15 years, very much as an applied statistician, applied biostatistician, where, as I say, the heart of my job is talking to people about what they're trying to do, helping them frame their research question, and helping, design studies, design databases, that kind of thing. Another important point is I've always liked talking. Many people say perhaps a bit too much. Sometimes my enthusiasm is a bit too much, even in meetings, but certainly I think that's obviously helped me with communicating as part of my job. But what I want to say about that is you don't have to like talking like I do to be able to communicate effectively as a statistician. And we all can find our own ways of approaching communicating. And certainly, it's something that people say that you can't be trained in, but I would like to dispute that. And I think that there's a lot of key things we can take from our own experiences, other people's experiences, that can help us develop our own communication skills. So why am I talking to you about communication? This was part of a prior talk that I have delivered, and I think it's a common conception of people that statisticians are not the best communicators. Certainly one of my long-term collaborators, friends, used to say, how do you know a statistician at a party? It's the person looking at their shoes. How do you know an extrovert statistician at a party? It's the person looking at someone else's shoes. Now, he used to tell me this about monthly. We've been collaborating for, I don't know, about 13, 14 years now. And, I don't find this joke particularly funny, but he thinks it's absolutely hysterical. And he's not the only one that has shared this kind of joke before. As I say, there is this perception that we can't talk to people, and that we're not going to be people communicating with others. But actually, it's such an important skill for us to develop. And I think it's really critical that we recognize its importance and try and make some steps and make some efforts to try and develop those skills ourselves. So, of course, there are some statisticians out there who are sitting perhaps alone doing pencil and paper, or more likely computer simulation mathematical work. But of course, that's in the minority, really. I think generally statisticians, our job is to help other people to apply methods to problems involving data analysis, or thinking about statistical methods that are appropriate. So generally, it's part of our job to speak to people. And, as I say, it's perhaps very exceptional, particularly academics and maths departments, perhaps, that don't necessarily have to speak to non-statisticians, if you like. But one of the big challenges for statisticians is that we really have to be able to take in a lot of information across possibly a range of different topics, depending on where you work, and then try and put that information together to express the problem in a way that can be answered statistically. So communication for us is not just about trying to get across what we know in statistics and what we can share from that perspective. It's also actually about understanding other people's viewpoints and actually trying to learn about their disciplines, which makes it fundamentally quite an exciting area to work in, but also particularly challenging because we're constantly having to learn and think, not only in our own space. Of course, one of the biggest challenges that I've certainly found, and I know many among my peer group and my employees and mentees have found, is that we're just not told how to do this. No one shares this with us. And of course, part of our professional training really in university is of course focused on mathematics and computer skills. Completely understandable, of course, that's at the heart of the work we do. But there's so much more to the job, and I think in not having some training in communication, we're really missing out on getting some support with some of the challenges we face. Now, things may have changed since I did my degree in statistics in the UK. I finished my honours in 2006, and then went on to do a PhD in mathematics and statistics. And I have to admit that through my whole 4 years of my degree and honours, I didn't really have to present at all. My first oral presentation was in my honours year. And so that was the first time I had to speak to a group of people since high school. And, that was incredibly daunting for me, and certainly for a lot of others among my class. And I just really wish that not only had it been presentation work, but that we'd had a bit more in terms of developing some of the skills that I need in my everyday job. So there's often some emphasis on written skills, and there was a little bit of that in my training, thinking about how we would write reports, but not really thinking about it for different audiences. And when it came to oral communication, it was more, the only things I got were more about how to present. So if you're going to do a poster presentation in an academic setting or an oral presentation, how would you best deliver that presentation to people? Since then, I have seen more communication training available to people, but often that's in the form of finding your voice and making your pitch, or maybe engaging in the media. And while those things are very useful, and I wouldn't say we shouldn't necessarily be doing those things, many of us are not necessarily going to have to engage with the media, but a lot of us, if not all of us, are going to have to work with other people to communicate what we do as statisticians and actually try and help other people with our statistical approaches. So what I'm going to try and cover today, and as I said, there's a lot here, so I might go a bit faster over some sections than ideally I would like to, but I just want to share a bit about what I've learned from some of my own experiences, and things that might be some tips that could help you as you're developing your own communication style and communication approach. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is valuing the experience you have. Now, this is something I usually put as a bit of a footnote to talks I give on communication, but actually I want to bring it up to the fore and really highlight at the start why we need to begin by doing this, because I think part of the problem as statisticians is we often, particularly early career statisticians, can go into an initial meeting feeling quite fearful of what's going to happen in the meeting and why you're actually there. So I want to begin by talking a bit about that. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about establishing trust and managing expectations, different types of people you might have to communicate with, reflecting on my own particular experience in the academic sector, but this could be relatable to those of you that aren't working in academia. Some about some of the importance of guiding communication pathways and some of the work I've done in negotiation. So starting by valuing the experience you have. So this, as I say, I've tried to emphasize a bit more in this talk because this is something that comes out a lot when I speak to my own mentees, my colleagues, my friends, my employees, is that one of the hardest things is feeling like the meeting is scary. It's going to be scary for you because you might not be able to answer the questions, and you might not feel that you're the right person to be there, particularly if you're, early career and you're meeting someone that's more experienced or more senior than you. So you might think, well, why do they need me? What am I here to contribute? But the key thing I want to get across to all of you, particularly those of you that are early in your career, is that these feelings are absolutely normal. I certainly still experience these feelings. I love the excitement of initial meetings and meeting new collaborators, new potential clients. But I can't say that I don't go into these meetings without some trepidation. You just never know. You're dealing with people here. You never know how people are going to be, how they're going to interact with you. And certainly you can have questions asked of you that you can't answer. So the things I like to think about when I go into these initial meetings is that it's okay not to have all of the answers. I certainly don't now expect of myself that I can answer everyone's questions. And if I can, I say, oh, look, that's a really good question. I have to go and think about that. And I think that's reasonable. It's actually worse if you go in trying to fudge your way through something you're not really understanding than just being honest and upfront and saying, I've not encountered this problem before, I'll have to go away and think about it. Another thing to think about, of course, is you are attending the meeting as a statistician. So it may be that you are there meeting other senior people that aren't statisticians, but you're there because of your experience and your knowledge of statistics that they won't have because they've not had that training. So say I'm specifically talking here in this seminar about communication to people that aren't statisticians. And so you've got to think about the fact that even if you're early career, you have some training and knowledge that others don't have that you're meeting with, and that's why you are attending the meeting. So try and bring that with you, bring that confidence with you that you're there for a purpose. Don't bring it with like an air of arrogance. Of course, there's a balance between being confident and being arrogant, but certainly having in your head that you're there because of your training, the fact that you know statistics, should help you approaching meetings. Another thing I want to flag when I'm talking about valuing the experience you have is that mentoring can really help you when you're developing some of these, as I say, I hate the term softer skills, but softer skills like communication, because it's something, as I say, we're not trained to do, and we can really learn from others' experiences, and asking others how they approach communication. And actually, there's an interesting book that just came out this year on how to be an effective statistician, and they talk a little bit about mentoring and about statisticians who, through their training might feel confident about approaching problems on their own, and will have felt that during all of their training, they didn't have to ask for help, they did not need mentoring, they did not need anyone to talk them through what they need to be doing, because they were able to do all of the mathematics, the statistics, the computing that they were trying to do. But what mentoring can help you with, or discussions with your boss or peer group, is thinking about things like, when should we speak up in a meeting? Certainly you might find as a statistician that you think, well, I'll only talk when they're talking about the sample size calculation or the design or even just the analysis part. But that might be early on in the meeting, there'll be some red flags raised when people are talking about the question they're trying to answer. And you might think, I'm not really sure what's actually meant by that question. It's really important that you have a voice throughout the meeting and make sure that you advocate for yourself and your discipline, making sure that, I like to think of statistics as kind of the science of science. We're trying to make things as robust as possible. So it's important that you speak up when you think there is a question needing raised, even if you're not sure, is this bit relevant to the statistician? So now I've begun a little bit about talking about valuing your own experience. I wanted to talk a bit more about establishing trust and managing expectations, which is a huge part of the communication strategy that I try and adopt. Is how do I ensure that people want to work with me and know what they're going to get when they work with me? So one of the first things I flag is doing your homework. Now, I just mentioned that, I don't expect to be able to answer every question in a meeting, but certainly in advance of a meeting, if someone has sent me material or something to look at to help understand what they're going to talk to me about, I do try and look at it. Now, that's within reason. If someone sends me it, obviously 10 minutes or even maybe an hour before the meeting, I possibly will not have a chance to look at it. In which case, I don't fret. I just up front at the start of the meeting and say, look, I'm sorry, I've not had a chance to look at your material yet. But as I say, if they do give me enough prior notice, I'll make sure I set aside some time, even if it's just an hour prior to the initial meeting, to look through the material and try and make sure I understand a little bit of the context. So I'm not going in completely blind. And that can help build your own confidence. As I say, do this within reason though. Some people for the initial meeting will send me screeds and screeds and screeds of material. I don't have the time across all my projects to read all of that. But what I'll try and do is, look for key documents. Like if it's a new study and they've got a protocol, I might look at that. Or if they tell me this paper from another study is critical to understand what they want to do, I'll look at that. But again, at the start of the meeting, I'll flag what I was and was not able to look at so that they know. Another one that seems perhaps obvious is this idea of course being punctual. Here we're trying to build new relationships, and an important part of building trust is making sure that you're respecting one another. So hopefully your new collaborator, new client, whoever this person is you're working with will also be punctual, but it's important that you are there at the agreed upon time. Another thing is thinking about asking questions in non-technical language. So I like to start initial meetings by, I think of them as a fact-finding exercise, but it's really important that I'm not there in a meeting to show my own knowledge and demonstrate how smart I am in statistics. I'm there to try and understand what it is they're trying to do, what question they want to answer, and understand enough of the key elements so that I can help them, whether it's with the design or the analysis plan or whatever it is. But it's really important that I don't bog people down with statistical jargon and I ask them questions in non-technical language. So returning to this idea about what the first meeting is about, and as I say, I could probably do a whole day's worth of talking about just how I set up the first meeting and the things that I try and achieve in this initial meeting with a new collaborator. But as I said, it's really to understand the problem at hand. And that's why I go into these meetings with a certain degree of confidence, because I actually don't think that the pressure is necessarily on me. It's the person that wants to work with me and get statistical support that really has to be prepared for the questions that I have to get answered. Because I'm not thinking that I'm going to this initial meeting to solve the problem necessarily. Sometimes I can, but more often than that, not. It's just about learning about what they want to do. It's really important early on in the initial meeting to determine your collaborator client's level of knowledge of study design and statistics to ensure you're communicating at an appropriate level. And sometimes I'm just very upfront at the start of a meeting and say, look, I'm going to try and take this as slowly as possible. If I'm telling you things that you already know or I'm going too slowly, please let me know, because of course I don't know what your training is in statistics, but I don't want to go too high to start with and then lose you, because it's really important that I understand what it is that you need from me. Another thing that I hope I don't have to say is be courteous. Now, I flag this because sometimes it can be difficult. I have actually had collaborators that haven't approached me being courteous themselves. And so it's got my back up at the start of the meeting. But certainly, as a professional, it's really important that even if someone is approaching you and behaving poorly, that you at least, take a step back. Certainly, you don't have to, if someone's not being courteous to you, you do not hopefully have to remain in the meeting. But I think I found at times people can come to an initial meeting ready to have a fight with me because of perhaps prior experiences with other statisticians. And so I try and take this initial tone with a bit of a pinch of salt and think, right, how can I change the tack? How can I change the approach in this meeting? And certainly being courteous myself will always help. So as I say, the initial meeting is a bit of fact-finding exercise to try and identify what it is that they want to be doing. So I ask lots and lots and lots of questions. And I tell them at the start of the meeting that I'm going to ask lots of questions and I'm going to take lots of notes. And I say that, they're there to share their knowledge and experience, which I don't have because I don't have their content experience. But I need to take lots of notes so I can understand what it is they want to do. Now, I'm very old school. I'm a paper and pen kind of person. I find that if I actually handwrite something, it stays in my brain much more than if I type it or if I use a tablet or whatever. You find what works for you, but certainly get used to taking notes because it's important you have a written record of what has been discussed and what you agree to do. Now, for me as a biostatistician, I try to use existing frameworks to make sure I have all the information I need. And I think that also helps me with my confidence going into a meeting because I know the elements that I need to help frame the research questions. So thinking about the PCOP framework. So who are the people that we're going to study? Is this a randomized controlled trial or is it going to be an observational study? So what is the intervention or exposure? Is there a comparator group? What is their outcome and how are they going to measure it? Thinking about time. So always in the back of my mind, it's, if this study is a prospective study, how long is it going to take to get the data we need? But also thinking about time from my perspective as a statistician, when do they need my involvement? What do they need to do? And also study design. So I try and make sure through my notes that I get these bits of information so that I'm clear on what they want to do. The other thing I want to flag is online meetings, because I don't know about many of you here, but this is very much becoming the norm for me, and I find these very, very difficult. So I'm the kind of person that really likes to feed off facial expressions and body language and to change my approach in communication based on whether or not I think people are understanding me. So prior to 2020, my initial meetings, in fact, most of my meetings tended to be in person, which I much preferred, because I could really see if I was losing people. And for me, I have to admit, it's not even losing people necessarily statistics, it might be with this accent, because not everyone is used to dealing with my strong Scottish accent. So when we moved to the online meeting environment, I really struggled and I didn't know how well to adapt to that. And unfortunately, it's something that has continued. And certainly, I think for convenience, a lot of the clinicians that I work with or new clinicians I'm going to work with, they prefer online meetings because it's just much more convenient to them. But because it's so difficult for me to read body language and even facial expressions, of course, people often might have their own camera, their own image up on their screen, so they can see what they're looking like, they can see their own facial expressions, and that makes it really difficult for me to know if they're following me. So with online meetings, I just flag it at the start of the meeting. I say, I have to admit, I find online meetings difficult. And I say, look, it's really important that you let me know if you're not understanding me, whether it's the accent or, statistics. Either way, I'm not going to take offense. It's really important. I'm here to help you. And the best use of both of our time is that we're open and honest with one another about what we do and do not understand. And that, they shouldn't be afraid to ask what they might deem stupid questions because, I don't expect them to have the knowledge that I have. I'm here as a collaborator. I'm here as a statistician. They're there with their own expertise. and we're going to work together. So by actually being upfront and speaking about the challenges at the start, I found people are much more comfortable to say, no, I don't understand you. And as I say, sometimes that is my accent, and sometimes people ask if they can record the meeting so that they can look back at it later on to make sure they've understood everything I said, or, you know, they ask if they can get it transcribed, which, you know, I'm still dubious about at times, because how well these transcription services work with my accent is debatable. But still, I allow them to feel comfortable asking for these things that they might need by just saying, yeah, I completely expect this. So the other thing in terms of establishing trust and managing expectations is making sure you have a clear understanding of what is needed from you or the statistical team following this initial meeting. So as I say, I take lots of notes, but I make sure to ask questions, as I say, relating to timelines and what we need to be doing, so that I can figure out if we actually can do that in the time frame they have. So what tasks need to be completed, when do they need them to be completed by? And if I'm not sure that it's possible to meet their needs around other existing commitments, don't say you're going to do it during the meeting. In fact, in my job, I rarely commit to a new project during an initial meeting. I generally am upfront at the start and say that this is a fact-finding meeting to learn about their needs, that I also need to learn about other things, like, as I say, their timeframes, their budgets, and exactly what statistical support needs are there. And then I will return with that information to my broader team and discuss who can assist. Now, some of you might be the only statistician, so you might not be in that position, but still, I think it's very important where you're able to say, I need to go and review if this is possible around my other tasks, and I will certainly get back to you about what I think I can do. Another thing is making sure you understand the extent of your role in the work. So sometimes when people approach me for assistance, they actually want me to advise them on the statistics, but not to undertake it myself. Now, sometimes I actually find that involves more work on my part than if I were doing it myself. But certainly there's different needs involved, different time commitments involved, depending on exactly what they want from me. The other thing is thinking about if this isn't a project you have to do, so it's not something that your boss has assigned to you or some other senior person within your organisation, you have to think about whether it's worthwhile for you to take on this new project. So what are the benefits for you or your career? You know, I work in a hub that we do a bit of a fee for service. So while we try and collaborate with people on larger projects through grant work and get funding for bigger projects through that, some of our work is smaller scale, and we may be able to do small subscription packages that might not lead to ongoing collaborations, but certainly it will bring funding in for my team, if not publications. So some projects have some benefits but not others, and we need to ensure that we've got a bit of a balance so that there's, you know, nice ongoing collaborations there. The other thing to be careful in managing your expectations is that you have, if you're in the academic sector, particularly discussions about publications early on. Certainly in the past, I've found some collaborators have felt that if they're funding me for help, they don't necessarily have to include me as a co-author. That is not the case. And so waiting too late to have that conversation can be problematic. So again, a lot of this comes with experience, and so that's why I'm trying to flag to you these are some things I've learned from mistakes I've made myself. Trying to be as clear as possible about what you expect as well out of the collaboration is really helpful. So the other thing I do following the initial meeting is referring to my notes. I will draft hopefully a brief, but me being me, it's usually longer-winded than it should be. An email summarising my understanding of the person's needs and their timelines, and that will make sure that we're on the same page before I begin the work. The thing that I make clear in the email is that I am not going to begin work without confirmation that we're in agreement. So the responsibility after that initial contact is made on my part to summarise the work. The responsibility now lies with the collaborator or client to say, yes, this is what we're going to do. Now, in my own work context, there's often a little bit more to it than that, because we have funding that might need to be transferred or a collaboration agreement, just as I say, because the nature of my job. But certainly, I don't want to start work on something where I think I've understood without them saying, yes, that's exactly what we want you to do. So I'm going to pause at that point and just see, has anyone got any questions about what we've talked about so far? As I say, this is quite a lot of material for a short time frame, but as I say, it's hopefully just sharing some bits and pieces I've learned through my work. Yep, go Adrian.
Yeah, I can't form this into a question, but you know, the payment by publication is kind of it. I haven't got a value for it. I don't know if you've got a value for it. And actually, you know, I've had people disparage my CV once or twice saying, "Oh, well, you've only got that many publications because you're a statistician." So I'm not sure how much is authorship actually worth compared to sort of cold hard cash, especially when you're normally sort of in the middle. Anyway.
No, yeah, I totally agree. And I think what we often find, I mean, it's hard because we're academics, but we're also consultant in my particular group. So it really often has to be the funding. A lot of the time becomes for us before the publications. You know, few of us are core funded. We're all relying on grant income or subscription packages. So the funding is important, but we also need the balance of interesting projects that will lead to ongoing collaborations, as well as what we often see as these beefer projects that you know, sometimes are even just descriptive pieces of work, but descriptive is important in its own right too. And yeah, we end up being included as co-author whilst also receiving funding. But yeah, I think what I also sometimes flag to my team though is that they shouldn't feel that they have to be co-authors on a paper though, even if they've been funded to help with a project, because if we've been brought in too late to a piece, there's often not much that can be done to save it. And you've also got to think about your own kind of academic reputation as well. So do you want authorship on this paper, even though you've actually helped with the project? So I don't know. Yeah, I think it is a tricky one, Adrian, but I think making sure those conversations are had up front. If they're thinking, well, I've given you money, so there's nothing else required, I just want to make sure that they know that that's not the case, certainly with our group. Susan, you've got a question.
Yes, actually, I have two questions. Actually, more like follow up the previous question. So with regards to authorship as well. So like if, say, for example, someone comes and then asking for consultations, and then we are really consulting them, guiding them, but they never mentioned about authorship. What would you do? First question. And second question is more related to what you mentioned about doing the data analysis yourself. So like if someone come to you and then, I mean, in this case, in my workplace, so because of the constraint of my time, the person who meet me, because of the time constraint, I don't do data analysis for them. However, of course, you also mentioned there, well, you know, depending on the project and stuff, you may want to do the data analysis if it's interesting. So my question is more like, okay, so someone comes to me, first meeting, and straight away upfront, I need someone to analyze this. And obviously I don't have time. And do you straight up say no, or how do you actually navigate whether you want to accept their request or not? I think those two questions. Sorry.
No, it's good. I think some of that I'm going to cover a little bit later when I talk about sort of negotiations and trying to talk about when you say no and when you say, you know, not right now. I think it can be a tricky one. I think it's really important to be aware of your other commitments when you're going to initial meeting to see if it's actually even going to be possible for you. But if you're not sure, because it sometimes might be a new project might be particularly beneficial for you. So I think just communicating up front that you've got a lot of other pressing commitments. You'll have to take some time to reflect after the initial meeting on whether you can fit it in, but let's use the initial meeting to learn about what their needs are. With regards to the authorship, so I'm quite fortunate now in my current job because we actually have this collaboration agreement that outlines some of the expectations, and we often send that to collaborators in advance and say, this is what we do. So it's clear without me having to necessarily even bring it up that if there is a publication arising from work that we've been involved in and our intellectual contribution has contributed to that, then we would expect to be co-authors. And that could be even if you're just guiding someone through analysis rather than actually doing the analysis yourself. Still, you have an intellectual contribution there. I think it differs depending on the project, and sometimes I bring it up in the first meeting, sometimes I don't. Certainly, I find it easier with the big randomized controlled trials that we're on, because typically for the lead or the hands-on statistician working on a trial within our group, we will typically ask from the outset, that they would be second or third author on a paper arising from the work, with respect to the fact that they have had a lot of intellectual contribution to not only developing a lengthy analysis plan, but also often we will write the methods and results for the paper. I think it is a really hard conversation to have, and I'm not saying that this it is easy, but I think knowing that this is a conversation you have, so even if you're just flagging, we are going to talk about this at some point, and we are going to talk about authorship, and this is usually what works with me with other collaborators, then you'll get a gauge for how comfortable they would be to include you, and that will help you know if it's worthwhile moving on with the project. So if they're very close to it and saying, nope, definitely not going to happen, then that can help you to work out if you actually want to work with them. But anyway, I'm conscious that I've got another few other bits and pieces to cover, and I've got another 20 minutes. So I'll stop again after the next section, and we can chat again if there's some other questions people have.
Thank you.
But thank you. So regarding the next thing, thinking about the different types of people you communicate with, I think one of the things I find hardest is working out where I stand with the person that's looking for help, and what prior experiences they're bringing to the table that might affect how they may or may not want to work with me. I have found that people may not want to work with statisticians or want to work with me because of prior poor experiences they've had with statisticians where they've been made to feel stupid, or they haven't felt they were listened to. And so, as I say, I'm conscious often when people start off in a bad way with me, it may be because of that prior experience. So what I want to get across is, even if someone like I don't necessarily want to work with, or if I find that we can't reach a common agreement during the first meeting, they don't want my help or agree with me with the kind of help that should be offered, I do still want them to leave a meeting feeling happier about engaging with statisticians in general. They may still want to go their own way, they may not want to work with me, but I still try and think at least I'm coming in having an open discussion with them and trying to share knowledge and understanding, even if it doesn't lead to anything. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some different types of collaborator, client, people that I have worked with. Now, when I initially did a talk on communication, I came across this invited paper on communication and statistical consultation by Millman. And so the top three, the statistically ignorant, statistically unsure, statistics is a minor concern. These were three of some of the different characteristics that Millman flagged that I really kind of related to. I added to that with some of the others that I had come across, like this idea of a fad follower, or the we always do it this way, or of course the unfortunate my grant is due tomorrow. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the statistically ignorant, and of course in the spirit of establishing trust, which we were just chatting about, I highly recommend that you don't refer to the person you're meeting as statistically ignorant, but I'm just being mindful of the fact that sometimes we can approach people that really, really don't know anything at all about statistics. And in my experience with people like that, they can actually have a lot of big lack of confidence. They can feel very upset about their lack of knowledge. I've actually even had people come to me in tears because they are so worried that they're going to be judged by me because of what they don't know, that everything just feels like an uphill struggle for them. Now, I like to think that I'm not particularly scary, but I think sometimes this perception of people that can do mathematical things are fundamentally terrifying. And so what I try and do is make them comfortable by saying, I'm here to share my knowledge and training. I do not expect you to have the same knowledge and training as I do. That's why you approached me as a statistician, and I'm really glad you approached me. You have all this other expertise that I need to learn from. I don't know what you do, and so we're going to work together. But this person can be quite a hard collaborator to engage with, because they might be unaware of the information that statisticians actually need. And so you really have to talk them through it. So highlighting that statistics helps with problem solving, but really carefully spelling out exactly what you need from them. So it has to be careful, probing questions, often repeatedly in different ways, to ensure that the problem is explained correctly. With this type of collaborator, you might not get all the information you need in the initial meeting. Sometimes I find that there's a bit more teaching that I have to do, to be honest, in the first or even the second meeting. So again, depending on this, whether you need to or want to work with this individual, you might have to be aware that you have to invest a lot more time at the start. What about this statistically unsure that Millman talks about? Well, this is someone that might have a vague knowledge of some statistical techniques. So they might have done some statistics as part of their training. And often they come across, common things like correlation, t-tests, analysis of variance. And so what happens is these people may suggest one of these known approaches as a solution to their problem. And might be quite insistent, well, I've done this course. This is obviously what I need to be doing. And typically with this type of a collaborator client, I have to be very careful to steer them away from focusing on the methods. Now, this is true of any collaborator you meet in the initial meeting. Like, I'm really keen on wanting to know what question they want to ask. It's not about focusing on methods. But this type of collaborator, unlike the completely statistically ignorant, may need to be really pushed away from methods discussions so that we can get the information that we need. This is also true a bit of the statistics of minor concern. This type of collaborator really frustrates me, I have to say. This is often a kind of collaborator that comes to me after they've already submitted the paper and have had feedback and someone's criticised the statistics, and they just come to me wanting me to fix it. So this kind of collaborator can be quite challenging because they could have attempted the analysis themselves, or they could have asked someone in their team, often someone non-statistical potentially, so it might be a PhD student or it might be someone junior, to do the analysis for them. And what they want me to do is just to rebut often these concerns about the statistics that a reviewer has raised. Now, what I do in this type of consultation is, again, often I just ignore the results from the analysis and go for the same approach as with the other types of people that are approaching me early on, and just say, to really help you, I have to understand what your research question is and go back to the start. So I'm going to ask these probing questions. This can be very, very difficult because often this type of collaborator just wants to rush through it and they don't understand why I'm taking this time because they've already done all of this work. So again, sometimes I won't continue to work with this collaborator unless I have to, but ultimately I just make it clear to them that it's in their best interest that we start from scratch, talking about what the project was out to do, because that will equip me to actually help them. So I'd say one of the ones I wanted to add is this idea of this fad follower, and I get this actually quite a lot, as I'm sure many of you do as well, and it's people that, again, methods focus, thinking about using whatever is the latest craze. So for me, that's been things like structural equation modeling, latent class analysis, machine learning, which are not necessarily appropriate for the kind of questions that people want to answer. At the moment, it's a lot of prediction modeling. Everyone seems to want to do a prediction model, irrespective of whether the question should be a prediction model. And so this can be really tricky because, of course, people want to be seen to be doing what's at the cutting edge. And even if they're not statisticians, they want to be using cutting edge stats methods. So what I have to do is, again, like the other types of collaborators move away from the methods focus, say I need to really understand their question, and then be prepared to have to stand up for alternative methods and justify alternative options. So ideally, you don't want to just say, no, I'm not going to do this, although sometimes you will have to if they're so insistent and you don't think the approach is appropriate. But I think being prepared to justify the alternative options and highlight why you want to do those can be really helpful with this type of collaborator. There's also the we always do it this way people. So the folk that are afraid of change and want to continue to use the techniques they're familiar with, irrespective of the suitability of their approach. These people can be really difficult to convince. And I think one of the reasons on reflection that this can be challenging is because if they've used these methods in the past, they suddenly think now working with you, you're criticizing all the work they've done to date and are telling them that everything they've done is wrong. And of course, that would be very upsetting to hear. So what I try and do is flag that, statistics is a research area in its own right, and it's evolving too. Methods are developing. Best practice approaches can change. We also have the benefits of new methodology and also better computing availability and powers and whatnot, so that we can actually do things in better ways. So I try and make it clear to them that I'm not saying what they've done in the past is wrong, even if perhaps I actually think that's the case. I would not necessarily say that. I just try and convince them that with this project, here is what I think would be the best approach to move forwards. Okay, so some of you may have seen this video before. I'm probably not going to show all of it, just in the interest of time, but this is a common feature of some of the meetings that I have with people.
I have a study, and I need to know how many patients I need. I think I only need 3 patients.
Okay, what kind of study is it?
I'm doing a lab study. Can I just use 3 patients?
That depends. What are you trying to show?
We always use 3 patients.
Okay, what are you trying to show?
I'm trying to show that drug A and drug B are better than only drug A.
How are you measuring if it is better?
We are looking at apoptosis. Can we just use 3 patients?
What kind of measure of apoptosis? Do you know how variable that measure is?
We always use 3 patients. That is what we have published before.
3 patients per group or in total?
Yes.
Okay, let's try something different. What type of measure are you using? And is this an in vitro study? An in vivo mouse study?
It is an in vitro study of patient samples, and we are looking at measures of apoptosis after treatment with drug A and drug B versus drug A and control. And drug B alone.
Oh, how many groups are you analyzing altogether then?
My grant is due tomorrow. I just need to know if I can just use 3 patients per group.
Okay, well.
Right, so I'll stop at that point purely in the interest of time, but if you've not seen this on YouTube, I encourage you to go and watch it. It's, as I say, I've seen this video quite a lot and I still find it frustrating to watch. But it's common for people to come to you not realizing how much time statisticians need to actually assist and what kind of information that we need. And so, if you can, it's up to you to decide if the effort is worth the reward. Sometimes strategically you must help the individual. So if it's someone that's head in your organization, or maybe your boss has asked you for it, but hopefully not. But sometimes it's necessary to say no. So for you, those of you, if you go back and watch this video, one of the things I find frustrating about watching it too is, while it's frustrating as a statistician watching the biologist and what they're trying to get across to get the information they need for tomorrow, the statistician is also using too much jargon and not really helpfully asking questions. And so I think there's a problem in the communication in both parties. So, certainly we have to be aware that we're not necessarily blameless in not getting the information we need if we're pitching things in jargon. But of course, if someone wants something done by tomorrow, they have to be aware that we're not just waiting for their project to come to us. So regarding the people we're working with, irrespective of the type of meeting you are, the type of person you're dealing with, remember you are in control of the meeting. You've been consulted because of the expertise you bring, and you're there to help. So it's really important you do get the information you need to assist them. So sometimes it can be hard. Sometimes I feel like I'm having to interrupt someone if they're going off on a tangent, which could be very interesting, but I'm conscious that the time is running out and I need to get the information I need. So sometimes I have to say, look, this is all incredibly helpful for context, but I was just wondering, when you're talking about this, do you mean this particular outcome, that kind of thing? But, you know, you need to make sure that you have what you want to be able to help going forward. Now, I'm going to quickly cover guiding communication pathways, because this is going to differ depending on what area you work in. But I think what I've realised over the time I've worked as a statistician is that people really don't know necessarily when they should be talking to us, when they should be engaging with us. Now, it's becoming much more common, certainly in my work, for people to engage with us early on when they're doing a randomised controlled trial. And they'll ask for assistance with design, sample size calculation. Perhaps not so much for observational studies. Certainly, they often come to us once they've collected the data, which is very frustrating. But regardless of whether it's a trial or an observational study, we often find that people get assistance at the start and then disappear. And then problems can occur down the track that we really should have been aware of, but they didn't know whether we needed to know or needed to be consulted on some of these areas. So like, this is just a bit of a flow diagram that I created to help us when we're communicating with people about working through randomized controlled trials with us. And actually, it was through delivering this presentation on another communications talk that I delivered to statisticians that I thought, well, actually, I need to share this with the collaborators. They don't know when we should be talking to them. So we now actually have an infographic that I use in initial meetings about trials to talk about these different elements and the fact that statisticians really should be involved in all of them. And we subsequently, as a team, work to think about how to highlight exactly what's needed. So, of course, where possible, get involved in the study design. You know, it's important that we make sure the design is appropriate. We help draft the protocol. We help check that everything flows from the research questions, design, into the brief analysis section that's in the protocol. Similarly, it's important we're involved in survey and database development. These are often elements that we're not part of, and then suddenly we discover down the track that the data collected is not fit for purpose. Things like randomization, it's important that they're aware of how much notice we need for that, because sometimes it's the day before they want to go live, they suddenly would approach us. Similarly, for data checking, we always stress that we're not data managers, but sometimes we don't know who their data manager is. DSMBs, data safety monitoring boards, particularly for our trials, we need to make sure they've got time for this. And then also, how long we need for statistical analysis plans, analysis reporting. Again, people think that this might be snap your fingers and it's done, but actually for our large trials, we try to have, it says 12 months here, I try at least 6 months, but if they want to publish the statistical analysis plan, we try for 12 months. People wouldn't know that without us telling them that. So it's really important we share so that we're managing expectations with both parties. So the key thing here is, don't assume that the collaborators know when they need to involve you, because they might think we're only needed when the data are collected. So what I've found over time is that if we're not kept in the loop at all points, things can go very wrong in our studies. So I'm conscious I've got 5 minutes left, and I had clearly far too much material here, but I did mention I was going to talk a bit about negotiations, because I think it is one of the hardest things to do. But it's really important that you are able to stress when you can and can't help with a project. We have very limited capacity to take on new collaborators and projects, and there's always a big stretch of demands on our time. So it's important that you're aware of what you're working on, and some of Emily's talk at the next seminar will help with this, so you know whether you can take the project on in your time frame. And I'm honest at the start of a meeting that I do not know if I will be the person that can help them or that our team can help. So I'm not going to go through my examples, as I say, in the interest of time, but I'm happy to share these slides with you after this session. But I do have examples here about not right now, not like that, and saying no. Where possible, I try and avoid saying no. But sometimes I have when I just feel that it's not a worthwhile project, or my own reputation would be at stake because it's not a good project. So I just want to finish off by talking generally about communication as a statistician. It's really important that as a statistician, you get your voice heard, but I'm conscious that it can be very difficult, particularly early in your career. But you have to be aware that if you have questions and concerns, that it's likely that reviewers or external parties will have similar questions and concerns. So, and there's ways that you can pitch them. I mean, I'm happy in meetings to say, look, maybe you've covered this, maybe I missed this somewhere, maybe this is a stupid question, but did I miss how this is going to be measured, or why we're designing it as a 3-arm trial and not a 2-arm? Like, I'm happy to flag that there's something missing. And, you know, sometimes it is a stupid question. Sometimes I may just have missed something, but I better flag it early on in case it hasn't been thought of, so that we can resolve them as early as possible. Now, the other thing is thinking about communication as the scary thing. I mean, it can be, but actually getting to talk to all these smart people with different topics, projects they're working on is one of my favourite things about the job. I learn a lot about lots of different areas. My brain is constantly stimulated and I get to help people. And it's quite often people that have had bad experiences with maths, and actually really I'm trying to make them feel less afraid of it. As I say, I try not to feel the pressure to know the answers to questions straight away. And actually you find more often than not with experience, people are often asking quite similar questions. And actually if I don't know the answer now, I get quite excited because I have to go and look it up. The other thing is, clearly, I've said to you all, I like talking. It's my default state to keep talking. But that doesn't mean if you're not like me that you can't communicate effectively as a statistician. Everyone has their own communication style. Everyone has to find it. And the thinking about planning what you need to get from a meeting can perhaps help you if you're not feeling so confident. So key things I want to end on, even if you're early in your career, remember that you're bringing knowledge from your training, and that knowledge is really sought after. There aren't enough of us around, and it's important that you value what you do know. Prepare as much as you can in advance for meetings within reason, but as I say, remember you don't have to have all the answers. Think about your conflicting time pressures and communicate these openly, because it's managing expectations, and that's what leads to good ongoing collaboration. And don't assume people know when they should reach out to you. So apologies, I've pretty much run to practically bang on 1 here, but I really appreciate you all joining me today. And if anyone's got a quick question in the last minute, I'm very happy to answer them. Maxim, quick off the block.
Just turning my camera on, hang on. There we go. So I'm fortunate enough to come to statistics from a field where communication is more widely practiced and taught and so on. So how important would you say it is for one to highlight one's proficiency in these skills in your CV or LinkedIn or whatever when trying to find work in statistics?
I mean, I think it's something that should be emphasized more. I think it will depend what kind of job you go for. Certainly if we're applying for a job with our group, I am very keen on seeing communication skills and confidence, because of course the nature of our job is you're speaking to lots and lots of different people quite often. But I think it is a tricky one, because people are often looking at the methods and the CV and the qualifications and statistics. But yeah. I certainly myself will emphasize that this is something that I feel I can contribute, because I do believe it's one of the strengths I have as a statistician. So if you have training in that area, make sure it's there, make sure it's highlighted, and in your cover letter as well, because it'll help you relate to collaborators.